Hi, this is Gandhar. You are listening to Catholic versus Other.
So tell the audience, if you would, a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you believe, and how you came to believe it.
I've done many things over my life. I guess I mostly consider myself a writer. I've been a creative writer, a poet, an academic, an anthropologist, and I'm also a songwriter and singer. And so I've made my life since I turned 20 or so. Now I'm in my mid to late 30s. And having traveled the world, I think I've been to something over 30 countries now. And with all I've read and studied, I've seen a lot of different religions and ways of life and philosophies and rituals. And I have my own upbringing, and my own thoughts in face of all that. And finally, having seen so much diversity, both the glorious parts and the dirty parts, I have nothing much else to say except that anything is possible.
When did you realize that anything is possible? Was it just now?
More and more. No, more and more. I won't lie to you. I'm not a pretentious guy. I was thinking a little bit about what am I going to say.
Okay.
I saw the categories on the website, and I said, "Wow, what am I going to be?" I used to identify as something, in a context like this, as spiritual, but without religious affiliation.
Were you ever a Muslim, Hindu, Christian, Jew, or anything like that?
Well, I grew up with a Hindu mother who's not necessarily opposed to eating beef, and an atheist father who liked to take us to the Hare Krishna temple.
Okay. As a child, did you ever pray to God or the gods?
Well, that's what was very funny about growing up with my parents. We did a lot of pujas at home, and we were also part of like a Bengali community that did religious celebrations in the city. So we had other Bengali friends, who had kids more or less the same, like me and my siblings. And but at home, to answer your question, you could be described as my mom being really fervent and having this culture that was so dear to her, and really getting into that deeply, and asking us to pray for good grades and good jobs and things like that in the process. To my dad, kind of being more on the clanging the pan side, I don't know what it's called exactly, but there's like a thing you hit, to make noise in some of the rituals, like a dang, da-dang, dang, da-dang. It's like a little instrument. I don't know what it's called. And
is that where your love of music came from, or? Partly.
I think, yeah, I can say that the love of music and the love of travel, the love of discovery, all of that have been there from very early on, and because of my parents. I mean, my dad is a sitarist, a tabla player, and now in his retirement, he's become a published poet of many books in Bengali, and a painter who's doing exhibitions, But he said that. He's like, my first love was Bengali literature, and that was his first degree. But then along the way he said, well, I want a life, I want a career, I want a life in Canada, I want to raise a family. And so he did that. And then it's kind of when he kept the music, he had all this music and stuff before, and he came back to it once we were adults and out of the house.
Okay.
So my dad would be more on the music side, clanging the pan. It would be in a way where he's enjoying it, but also subverting it as an atheist. And it was just in his eye. I don't know how else to explain it. It's just more watch this and enjoy it, even if you don't believe it. And that was a real funny message to be having in a prayer service, where you have this dichotomy between your parents' beliefs.
What was the look on your mother's face when he was doing that?
She was oblivious.
Okay.
She was behind,
Interesting dynamic.
And the same, he would go to the Hare Krishna temple and be look how beautiful this is, and you can enjoy this, and you don't have to mock it, but you also don't have to believe it, or you can. And so that was a really strong message growing up. So already, I guess it was maybe the seeds of anything is possible. We did this great trip, Bohemians, the family. They really love to travel, and they want to show their kids the whole world. And one time they rented a car in France, and we did, I don't know, a lot of countries just by car, like in a circuit. We drove like through countries all the way to Italy and took a ferry to Greece and continued all the way back around to France. And so we went through Romania and the former Yugoslavia, you know, when they were still communist. And I got to see that. I was very young.
Did communism impress you with its lack of religious color?
You know, I might have been younger even for that first trip. I might have even been like 7 or 8. So what I don't remember much of the trips. I remember scenes more, like going through Romania and you know, farmers farming, and then there's just soldiers every so often, you know, to keep an eye on them. But then, you know, we also went to like the Leaning Tower of Pisa and did little cheesy tourist photos like you would when you're a family on vacation, you know. So it's like the whole spectrum. There's a whole spectrum already right there. And so young. And even, I talk about this in my first book, Kolkata Dreams. It's in the prologue, I think. And it's a true story. My first memory is actually like between reality and a dream, because when I was 3, my parents took me on a trip. I was the youngest sibling, and they took us all on a trip which encompassed, I had to get the facts straight, and I can't remember them offhand, but I saw the Mona Lisa and the Taj Mahal on the same trip.
Okay.
That's the fact of it. And the memory starts like I'm on the stairs of the Taj Mahal, and the monkeys are scattering around. This is the real memory. They're like, "You remember that?" I'm like, "Yeah." And they were tying the white shoes on your feet. I'm like, "Yeah." And the guy was crouched in front of me. He had this string on his across his chest, which is like a religious thing we could talk about later. And then he was like just crouching down, and I remember the shoes like were very loose, like a kind of boot with a string with cloth, and they tie it around to protect the inside of the Taj Mahal when you visit.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And that's what they do there. And I remember he couldn't really, like my feet were so small, he couldn't really get it tight enough. And then that memory ends, and then this is the best part, is clearly the dream, because then I'm in the Taj Mahal. So I don't know what happened next in like reality, but my next memory is a dream, which was I'm in the Taj Mahal, and I'm looking at the Mona Lisa with these boots on. And there's some laughter in the background, and I see 2 older kids from some other family like throwing a boot around and having fun playing catch. And then I look down at my feet, and one of my boots was missing, and my shoe was touching the inside of the Taj Mahal, and I felt like I desecrated God. And that's like my first memory I've carried with me. That's what I've carried with me from the beginning. That's the beginning for me.
Intense.
It's very intense.
It's funny, you have 1 foot in, 1 foot out of the sacred, and it's like your mother and your father. Did you ever feel like you could help bridge the gap? I'm sure you want religious unity.
No. I want unity, but I don't necessarily want religious unity. I like religious diversity.
Okay.
It makes the world more interesting, more colorful.
Is the truth important, though? Is it important if 2 religions disagree about doctrine? Is it important that they resolve it, or no?
No.
No.
I believe there can be 2 or more contradictory truths existing all at once in a moment, and that's okay.
But when you go to the cashier and she gives you the wrong change, you're always sure to correct her, right?
That's just math. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I correct it the other way. Sometimes like, "Oh, you gave me back too much change." Take some back.
So everything is possible. This is pretty much a theme throughout your life, you think?
Yeah. I've had a near-death experience. Okay. I don't know if I've ever told you about that. I was 20, I guess, and I was visiting. Well, you know, I went to India and I wrote that book, Kolkata Dreams. I was in India for 6 months in West Bengal, but right before I went, I'd taken a year off university. I was at Western Ontario those days, studying English, and then. I just went down, before the trip, I went down to visit some friends who were still in school. And on the last morning, they decided let's move this aquarium to like our friend's house. I was just like along in this car, you know. And I remember it was really weird. The guy said, "Why don't you sit in the front? I'm moving the aquarium. You can have the front." I'm like, "No, don't worry about it. Who cares?" Because like I was getting out at the next stop.
Okay.
I was going to stay on and move the aquarium. He's just going to drop me back at my friend's. And I didn't even belt up. And sure enough, you know, the guy decides to pull a U-turn at some point and gets belted by a car. I see these guys' two heads in front of me like smack together, and my head smacks the aquarium. And I severed my temporal artery, and I was left for dead, like on the wooden table that they leave corpses on to go to the morgue, like next stop morgue. But I woke up in the emergency room on the corpse table, and I was kind of like, to the first nurse, I was like, my head hurts. I remember them stitching me up. I remember them working on me, but I think finally they'd left me for dead when I came to. There were no blood transfusions. That's the weird thing. There's never, like, I think all the blood was gone, and the ambulance driver looked at me like I was a ghost because she was waiting for me at the end, and she said, "I've never seen anyone lose that much blood." And doctors I've talked to said that's like a 99% fatal injury, the temporal artery delivering, you know, blood to your brain. So that one, I was actually, okay, so...
Did you experience anything during that time, or?
Yeah, I remember like in the ambulance, I was like, "Don't fall asleep or you will die for sure." Like, I was like, I could see it was bad. There's a lot of blood, you know. But I guess it wasn't my time. I mean, you know, up until then, I actually had been terrified of death. Maybe because of my upbringing, you know, my mother was really overprotective in the upbringing, so I was like terrified of death and making mistakes. And after that, I lost all my fear. I'm like, you know what? If that didn't get me, then I guess I still have a reason to be here. That was a big one. While I was studying the English, I kind of got into UFO theory for a while, how UFOs and cloning can, I got into it as an idea, you know, how it can explain aspects of the Bible. I don't know if you remember this, I was like kind of into Rael's literature for a while. And I even got to meet Rael and speak to him for 10 minutes in that time at Kona. That's the same month he was in Playboy magazine. He was in Montreal, and I went to see, went to the conference there, the monthly conference they have, and I got to hold court with him for 10 minutes. That was pretty cool. But that also got me thinking about, in a more fun, like in a more like, something more like philosophical, I guess, what, like is it the debate between creationism and evolution, right? And I kind of saw, it's hard to think of it as it could be both, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
There could be a planet with like its own ecosystem and beings going on, and then some advanced species could come and start mucking around with genetic sciences and so on. A lot is possible. And I think anything is possible, just as a possibility to contemplate. And then you knew me also when I was doing my theology degree at Concordia, and I was studying the Nazarites in the Bible, the historical Nazarites from the Bible, how that evolved as a rite. So the Masters is out there for anyone who wants to read it.
Is there a title for that?
Yeah, that one is called "Where Have All the Nazarites Gone?" And
They're the ones who don't cut their hair or drink hard drink?
Yep. But then in the early 1900s, two black African movements that came up in my searches online when I was searching Nazarite, they picked it up, the number 6, 1 to 21, especially 1 to, I think the first 9 or 10 lines even, where the 3 laws are, the 3 main laws. They picked it up independently of each other as their central practice within this kind of, these, which I explain in the dissertation, Hebridic religious movements, which in both cases, and different sources, but to be general, mixing aspects of African traditions, biblical traditions, Judaic and Christian, Indian traditions, and even modernity, the technology of modernity, as it comes to the fore in the 20th century.
Both independent groups had done that, or?
Yeah, that's what was going on, and so it's a study of that. Why the passages, and then what are the results? And what does that say about post-colonialism? What does that say about a bunch of other things too?
What are the names of these two groups? Do you know?
It's in my dissertation, yeah. I know them. One is called the Shembe Church, and one is Rastafari. I studied Rastafari in Jamaica for my dissertation, and then in my postdoc I studied Rastafari in South Africa and Morocco.
Okay. Did it start in Ethiopia or?
No, it started in Jamaica. Like Rastafari as like a spiritual religious movement started in Jamaica, but it's based on certain understandings of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church in Ethiopia. That's why a lot of people have that confusion. But
Haile Selassie,
the Ethiopian Church was there doing its thing for thousands of years. Haile Selassie is known in that tradition as the last emperor, the 225th.
He was an Orthodox Christian.
He was the emperor of that system, the final emperor. By the way they had it in Christianity, they continued a similar type of tradition. It's the only church that looks at both the Old Testament and the New Testament in the same regard.
Well, my church does.
Well, I don't maybe there's other ones, but the oldest one anyway.
Okay.
Maybe there's what's your church?
Catholic Church, Roman Catholic.
Oh. No, but like what I mean is they also practice the Old Testament rites.
Oh, I see. No.
That's what I mean to say.
Oh, I see. Okay. They keep the 613
the whole
laws?
old thing together with the New Testament.
With circumcision, with everything?
Yeah.
Oh,
I don't know about circumcision.
Okay.
But it did come up in my research, like the Shembe Church in the Zululands, because they really consider themselves keepers of the Mosaic tradition. They do circumcise.
Okay.
But Rastafari didn't extend it that way, the laws of the Nazarite. They're more natural guys, you know? So they wouldn't see that. They don't even want to cut trees sometimes. They want to get everything natural. So that would be counterintuitive to Rastafari. So there was a discrepancy, obviously discrepancies between the two groups, a lot more, I would say, than similarities finally.
Yeah.
Even though what they were following in the Bible, the parts that they found the most important, were, more or less the same parts.
So you I would imagine you gained a lot of knowledge, so you sort of grew a soft spot in your heart for these people and their tradition that they had developed, or was it just in a purely objective scientific role that you played there?
Yeah, the people used to have to pretend they were truly objective, but now in anthropology you can say, like, obviously who I am is going to affect the study. Like one thing I addressed, for example, was, as a brown guy with a beard, and I grew out my hair, I grew out my beard to be a Nazarite. I was living.
You stopped drinking
with them. Well, I would, and my own time is my own time, but when I was doing the research, when I was doing the work, I was living as them. And it was very different for both groups. Like, for example, in the Shembe Church, they spend like hours on their knees in prayer. Hours, like.
On a hardwood floor or?
Concrete or grass. They have outer temples and indoor temples, and I've visited both types. And I still have scars on my knees. They'll be there for the rest of my days, just like all the Shembe followers. Now I got scars on my knees too. And then with the Rastas, this is what I want to say. It's like, I think the study is objective, but like, I would say, like, from a personal perspective, like, as a human being, I have more in common with the Rastas than with the Shembes.
Okay.
They're very, very austere and very, very strict,
The Shembe?
Yeah, and depends on which, they have different factions within the church, and some are more traditional, but it's a very hard life, and the one I couldn't identify with at all as a human being. It's not something I'd want to do, but there's aspects of Rastafari culture, of course, like reggae music, and even some of the Nyabingis, which appealed to me also as a musician.
Yeah.
I met a lot of really cool Rasta figures when I was there. I was living with Muta Baruka for a while, and he's someone who took over the mantle of Rastafari prophecy since Bob Marley passed away. He's one of the biggest figures in Rastafari living today, legend. And he took me under his wing and showed me around. But I did some stuff on my own too. I was able to meet this musician Earl Chinna Smith on my own. He's also known as Melchizedek, the high priest of reggae. He's 75 or so now, and he's been on 500 albums for everything from Bob Marley's One Love to Amy Winehouse's final album as the guitarist. I got to record with him when I was down there a couple of tunes.
Is ganja central to Rastafarianism?
Oh, for sure. There's no doubt about that.
How do they view it?
They view it as a sacrament. They smoke it in a chalice to give you some points of reference with Catholicism. They take some of the words from religious traditions and they apply it to their own artifacts of culture.
I do want to interview a true Rastafarian. Are there any in Montreal?
You'll find some Rasta guys in Montreal, but what you're going to find about the Rastafaris, it's going to be very different depending where you find the Rasta. The Rasta who's a Rasta in Montreal is not going to be the Rasta growing his own ganja and food on a hill in Jamaica, right? So if you really want to learn Rasta, you have to go in Jamaica. There's no other way. You know?
Yeah. Is that true of the Hindu? Can I meet a true Hindu here, or do I have to go to India?
Well, I think we're lucky that way. I mean, I can't speak for all Rastas. Maybe you're going to find some deep. You're going to find some deep. Don't get me wrong. You'll find some deep Rasta guys here in Montreal, but there'll be this kind of
hybridized.
Yeah, because Rasta, the idea is self-sufficiency, agrarian life. And I talk about this in one of my articles called Rastafari Revisited, how there's, like, depending on a variety of factors, you know, like there's kind of what we could describe as more orthodox ideals and more secularized versions of Rasta.
Okay. Could there be an atheist Rasta?
There could be a lot of different things. Anything is possible. I know people who share a lot of views from 2 or more religions.
Okay.
I mean, that's what Christianity is, isn't it? Finally, it's at least a combination of old Hebrew traditions and Greek philosophy of the time. So everything is coming from the old. Everything new is always coming out of the old.
Do you know Saint Justin Martyr said famously, he was a pagan that converted to Christianity in the 2nd century. And he said that all truth belongs to us Christians. So it's this idea, because he was criticized for taking Greek philosophy in and embracing this philosophy and that philosophy. And he said, look, truth is truth. All truth belongs to us Christians. So that's how I feel about truth. And when Protestants poo-poo Easter or Christmas or this pagan tree or whatever it is, it's like God made the tree. And everything that's true about pagan religion, I embrace. 100%. That's the Catholic Church's teaching.
Is it?
Yeah. Everything that's true.
Really?
Everything good comes from God.
Thought.
Everything good comes from God. If the pagan truth is good, because it comes from God, you know.
Because no, they revised that in Vatican II. Before Vatican II.
No, there was no dogmatic statement in Vatican II. No dogmatic statement. It was purely pastoral.
Changed it. No, I'm saying that it's only in Vatican II where they changed that. The Catholic Church, that they admitted. I forget which of the documents it's in, but they admitted one of the writers, and I met him. Charles Kennegeezer was involved in that. He was a professor at Concordia. They revised it. It used to be before Vatican II that the only way to truth and God was through Catholicism.
No,
in Vatican II they revised it.
No, there is no salvation outside of the Catholic Church. That is in place, but our understanding of it has evolved for sure.
Okay,
for sure.
All right. Well, I don't know all the specifics because I'm not a Catholic. I didn't say Catholicism. But what it does call to mind is something that I would say is finally my personal greatest frustration with organized religions, whatever that means. It's not universal to all contexts of organized religion, but where within that framework you have someone who says, I know the truth the best, and I have a monopoly on the truth.
I am the way, the truth, and the life.
I think if there's see, that's contradictory to anything is possible. Where there's one answer, I say bullshit. Because anything is possible.
So when Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, you object?
Well, we don't know what he said or didn't say finally.
If he said that, you would object to Jesus Christ?
Well, it doesn't say the only way.
If he says, no one can go to the Father but through me, would you object?
Yeah, I'd say, Jesus, man, what are you taking? What you on, man? Come on.
Okay, so you have an objection to one truth, one path. A lot of people are...
For everyone, because I don't believe that. That's not possible. There's too much diversity for there to be one way that's universally true for everyone.
there's an expression, I don't know where it comes from. It says, in essentials, unity. In non-essentials, diversity. And in all things, charity. So in the essentials, we have to be united, because contradiction there is deadly. But in things that are non-essential, diversity is embraced, because that's the color that we bring. If you go to a Catholic liturgy in Africa, it'll be different from the one in Japan or in Russia, right?
Yeah, okay, but here's the thing about Christian unity from a historical perspective, from a post-colonial perspective, is that often when Christians went to other places like South America and Africa and India and encountered indigenous cultures, say, or people who were living there first, they would come in and it's like, here, look, unity, let's all be together, let's all be one, and all religions are the same.
What?
But then the second part of that is, as long as you do what we tell you to do.
Well, did you say all?
It's like we can be united as long as you follow what we say to do, and that was the problem.
Well, I think we can agree that when Catholics, whether they're faithful or not, God only knows, but when Catholics, who are sinners, by the way, when they do evil, it's evil, and when they do good, it's good, right? It's no different from the pagan. When the pagan does good, it's good, and when it does evil, it's evil.
That's what's not true. In other cultures, there's a much more new, in Hinduism and African cultures, there's a much more nuanced version of good and evil. They're connected, you know. Here's a good example. I was telling someone the other day, like, you kill someone. Oh, it's horrible. Oh God. But two different situations. Two different people killed somebody. First guy, he just wanted to kill someone, to laugh at him, and to humiliate him, and to get pleasure out of seeing him die. The second guy was presented with a scenario where his wife and children were going to be raped and mutilated, and he killed the guy before he got to doing that.
Self-defense.
Two different situations, same action.
It's not the same action. It's very clearly distinguished and nuanced in the Catholic Church.
But that's what I'm saying. You have to look at all the scenarios. So,
and the Church does.
He had to commit evil, this guy, to save his family.
But the principle is life. The first principle is life. So self-defense isn't a violation of the commandment not to kill. It's regrettable that life was taken.
And so this is an extreme example.
Yeah.
But I'm saying within that, there's a lot of gray area and nuances.
Yeah.
Where good and evil aren't necessarily clear things.
Of course.
That's another possibility discovered along the way, is that sometimes there are necessary evils that need to occur for worse evils to be vanquished.
Well, there's a principle in the Catholic Church that we can never, ever do evil so that good may come of it. But when we do self-defense, that's the principle of life at work. We're protecting life. And so you may say, well, it was evil to kill the aggressor.
Listen, David, people do it every day. They send snipers to kill this and that guy, and they say we're doing good. You know? Is that true?
God only knows in each case.
Exactly.
I don't know.
And I don't know.
And it's hard to know. It's hard to know, and it's arrogant to claim to know, I think.
I think so.
That's what my church teaches.
And that's why I'm saying, like, until you're in it, and it's your only your perspective, you can't claim to know anything else beyond that for anyone else.
That's why we have to be careful not to judge hypocritically. We do need to judge things. For example, the example that you gave of someone who maliciously and gratuitously kills someone just for pleasure. If that's all there is to the story, I think we can judge that, and we should judge that, and that guy needs to be punished.
Absolutely.
So there is a certain judgment that is incumbent upon us, but there are many, many, many situations where it's just too complicated, and we don't know the answer, and we have to trust God and God alone. So yeah, it's.
But we are lots of little particles of God too. Each of us.
You believe that?
Yeah, well, this is also the part I want to tell you. No, I pray before I go on a plane. I'm a spiritual person.
Okay.
I told you, before I said anything is possible, doesn't mean that I'm not spiritual.
Yeah.
I'm still deeply spiritual. But like the same way my feet were in one world and another world, now it's like I have so many feet I can't count them, you know? if you understand what I mean, on a spiritual plane.
Okay.
And yeah, I had deeply spiritual moments in the Shenbei Church. I had deeply spiritual personal moments in studying Rastafari. There's no doubt about it. But I take that approach, and I guess I also get that from my Indian upbringing, is that music is prayer. You don't put your foot on a music instrument because it's disrespectful. Cooking is prayer. Cooking is worship. Everything should be elevated to like a spiritual offering.
How do you avoid falling into pride where you think that you are God and you are the source of everything that's good? How do you avoid that? Because it is a temptation.
No, I don't think so. That's the thing. I think that's why I never really became a big rock star or anything, because I just don't have that narcissism. Okay. I actually care about people way too much.
You feel like you're immune to the sin of pride?
No.
That's good.
I haven't been. Sometimes, but I've something I've been. It's one of the things I've actually been working on consciously my whole life.
Okay.
Is losing my ego, not having my identity being based on anything I've done in the past, just being in a moment. I'm trying to lose a lot of myself too.
I want to talk a little bit. I always talk about Buddhism because I'm fascinated by it. What's your perspective on it, and how is it different from the other Eastern teachings?
I don't know much about Buddhism.
Because you mentioned being in the moment, that sort of immediately brought to mind Buddhism. And
I mean, a lot of Buddhism is rooted in Hindu notions. A lot of it. Buddha was like the same way that Jesus was born Jewish or Hebrew, or Yahwistic. Buddha, Siddhartha, was born Hindu.
Brahmin or something?
Yeah. In that priest caste. And then he started something else. But I think the major lesson of Buddhism is detachment. Which is also a very valuable lesson. It's a hard one to understand. That was, like we were talking about pride. I was very passionate when I was young. I'm too much into my stuff. And I can say this for sure, the more I've become detached from pride, the more useful my contributions have been. The Ph.D. was almost a 6-year project of detaching from that pride. When you're an anthropologist doing it in that kind of methodology that I did, which was being with the group, going through everything with them, It's about not being yourself for 6 months, which is hard when, I think some people have described it as like a kind of a big personality, and it's nice. My personality is not so big anymore after all this research,
I guess there's a danger on the other extreme of not knowing who you are and not knowing what you believe and where you're going and what you're doing and what you can contribute, and you're just a mess. I'm not saying that about you, but it's a danger on the other end of the spectrum from ego. You need a bit of ego, right? You never felt lost and confused a little bit, or? Oh yeah, I was crying sometimes because I was so overwhelmed with what I was going through. I was in pain, I was going barefoot on pilgrimage for miles with these people too, on hot tar, sharp stones, sometimes on needles. I wore shoes my whole life, and I'm just going along barefoot on hike up this mountain with this group. There were a lot of arduous experiences, and then they fast a lot too, which I wasn't used to. Sometimes days on end there's fasting, so it's like you go through it. It changes you. That's amazing. But I got a lot of great research out of it. That PhD, African Nazarites, comparative study of the Shenbei Church and Rastafari. It's out there. I put it out there on the web. People read it. It seems people downloading it, and it's kind of making fun of the academic process at the same time. And I didn't mean for that to happen. So, remind me of the name of the book, the Veda, the hidden... Oh yeah, then there's the second poetry book, which I wrote in 2009, Maple Vedas. Can you give a little overview of that for the listener? Yeah, that's like a playful project for me where I wrote I wrote undiscovered scriptures about the travels of the gods of India, Shiva, Hanuman, the monkey god, Ganesh,
other gods, and just some. It's not a huge book, but there's just like a few random scriptures that take place. Some of them are from 3,000 years ago. Some of them we discovered they're from just like a few years ago. And it tells you what they've been up to in Canada and who they've met along the way. It doesn't tell the whole story, but it's part of the story.
Were you attempting to be faithful to the tradition of those gods, or were you bending them?
I'm clearly the author, but obviously, when I say they're undiscovered scriptures, it's just we're having fun with the idea that if these are truly gods and they're immortal, they're still here. And we just don't necessarily know all their tales of what they're doing. There's one, and for me, like it's like the shoe. It's half real, half in between, one door. So it's like half true and half play. But I'd like to believe that when Jesus was on the cross, Krishna was just floating there, whispering to him in his ear something nice. So there's a poem.
Was that part of your book? Or?
There's a poem about that. That's one of the poems.
Okay.
There's another poem with the monkey god Hanuman. He's riding on a moose, and they're having a conversation on a wintry day. And as I was mentioning to you before this started, we had 3 artists who contributed there, but Chris Dyer, who was on your show, he's one of the artists who's featured. And it was great to have his work because, the other 2 artists, they read the poems and they drew amazing images out of it. But Chris was a friend, and I was familiar with his work. But some of these poems had been written before we met even. But anyway, when the time came down to publish the book, I was just familiar with his work. I'm like, wow, some of these images would be really good for some of these poems somehow. And he contributed 3 really nice, beautiful pieces. One is like for the poem where the mentions that Ganesh's trunk would grow so long, sometimes it would curl around the world. It just happened to have a Ganesh curling his trunk around the world.
No way.
For example, but you can read the book Maple Vedas to find out more about that.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, it was a great project. I took a year off between my master's and my Ph.D., and I was able to get a little Quebec arts grant to do that. And this was one of the things I did that year.
Nice way to spend your downtime.
Yeah.
Have you ever labeled yourself as an atheist?
I toyed around with the idea for a while.
Okay.
It just didn't suit me.
No? Agnostic?
There was a bit of that, but I also started to realize that we all believe in things we can't see every day.
Do you believe in the supernatural, or?
I've experienced the supernatural.
Okay.
I've experienced ghosts. I've seen a UFO.
Okay.
I don't know why we're saving this for the end, but
do you believe?
I'm really blasé about it now. It's just stuff that happened in my life.
Afterthought. Oh yeah, there's that demon that I interacted with. Do you believe in demons, by the way?
Yes.
Okay.
Demonic energy, anyway.
Sure. Are you firmly on the side of goodness?
Yes, I want good to prevail.
Okay.
I always have.
You'll dabble in evil and play with evil?
No.
No?
That's what I was going to say. Sometimes in these moments where one evil is to counter another evil, if you're involved in that sometime, it's destiny washing over you. It's God.
Okay.
If you know that your heart is good, it's beyond society. It's beyond laws. Sometimes it's just God.
So, as a final wrap up, what would you say to anyone that's listening?
Tread lightly, be happy, and do your best to leave a smile on every face of every person you ever meet.
If you like your worldview, if you think it's swell, if you've got some questions, ask me and I'll tell. All you got to do is ask. All you got to do is